Committee Room 30. Signed. 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 Committee Room 30. Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Committee Room 30. Signed. 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 Committee Room 30. Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee
Public session. So just allow the public gallery to be populated by all our attendees. Okay, colleagues, I'm going to start with apologies. I received apologies from Mr. Buckley and Mr. Nesbitt, who are both in the United States. We have no other apologies. Declarations of interest, any in the room? None. Any online? None? Okay. Chairperson's business then, members. Just want to draw your attention in this week's written answers. The Minister advises of a sub-regional economic action plan and the development of a new approach to quality assessment in higher education involving the Quality Assurance Agency. Are the committee content that we write to the department seeking the relevant terms of references, the timelines and site of the associated reports as soon as they are produced?
Yeah.
Agreement in the room and agreement online. I wish to advise members that will speak on behalf of the committee on Tuesday the 19th of March 2024 on the parental bereavement confirmatory resolution debate, and obviously any marks I make will be in line with what was agreed at our first committee meeting. Also want to flag to members that an applicability motion may be brought before the Assembly for debate shortly. The motion would refer to the new EU Act 2023-2411, which covers geographical indicators for craft and industrial products. The committee briefly considered related correspondence at its meeting on the 14th of February. This was from the House of Lords Committee and dated from 2022. Given that the committee has not had the opportunity to consider this matter in detail, I do not intend to contribute to the debate in my role as chairperson of this committee, but do reserve the right that I may speak in my role as DUP MLA. Members are of course free to do that also. Are members content with that approach?
Yep.
Perfect, thank you. Draft minutes then, members, are on page 7 on our packs, and I seek your approval that they are a true and accurate reflection of our deliberations last week. Content online and content in the room? Perfect, thank you. Do any members have any matters arising from our discussions last week? None? Okay, we'll then move on to item 6, which is oral evidence from Renewables Northern Ireland. Invite our friends forward. Okay, Carl, you're very welcome. Stephen, you're very welcome back here.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you all. Members, in front of us we have Stephen Agnew, Paul Carson and Gareth Majimsey, who are all very welcome here to committee. I'd just refer members to a number of items within our pack which will be relevant to the discussion that we're just going to have. The Accelerating Renewables Report at page 33, the Northern Ireland Audit Office Report on Generating Electricity from Renewables at page 61, the NISRA 2022 Energy Report at page 149, a recent briefing note from Sony at page 272, and the Department's Energy Action Plan and Strategy at page 290. Gentlemen, with that, I welcome you all here and hand over to you if you want to provide the committee with a briefing. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm delighted to be here. I'll give a brief introduction to Renewable NI, the issues, and looking forward to the questions. The best bit. So Renewable NI is the voice of the renewable electricity industry in Northern Ireland. I'm its director, Garth's our chair, and Paul's our deputy chair. I suppose starting off with the good news, renewables are the cheapest, cleanest form of electricity generation. The more renewables we get on the system, the more we can bring down consumer bills and reduce our carbon emissions. Northern Ireland has fantastic natural resources for renewables, and we have been and should continue to be one of the leading countries in the world in renewable deployment. As you'll be well aware, the Climate Act set an 80% target for 2030 for renewable electricity, and as I say, we have been leaders. Where in 2022 we got to 51% renewable electricity, which is among the top countries in the world. The problem is most of those projects were built in the last decade when we had effectively a renewables boom in Northern Ireland under the old narrow system. But we stagnated. I sat probably in this room with the old Department for Enterprise, Trade and Investment, and was effectively told as a then MLA, we're just not going to do renewables for a while. And that's exactly what Northern Ireland did. It hit pause in the renewables industry. So whereas in 2017, we connected 400 megawatts of renewables in a single year, this decade we've connected 86 megawatts of large-scale renewables. So that pause, that policy decision to not promote and incentivise renewables has taken a toll, and we essentially went off a cliff edge. report we commissioned by KPMG, Accelerating Renewables, looked at our potential of getting to 80% by 2030, and it said, under a business as usual scenario, we'll not just miss it, but we'll miss it by a mile. So of the 1900 megawatts of new renewables we need, it estimated we would get 725, less than 40% of what's needed. So we have been leaders, but we're very much at risk of becoming laggards. The other thing the Accelerating Renewables report said was 82% of developers surveyed said Northern Ireland was not an attractive place to invest. The good news, I suppose, was that 100% said it would be a good place to invest if the policy environment was right. So again, we have the geographical and natural resources. We just need the policy in place to get where we need to be. In terms of what we need, we need market support. Look, I know Richard Rogers was here and said this will be announced in within weeks. But he was also at the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee saying it would be within weeks yesterday. And within weeks is what I've been told since December. So we are getting increasingly frustrated with timelines. I have to say, give the department credit where it's due. Communication's been excellent. There's some really good cross-departmental work taking place, but timelines are our biggest concern. So we do have a huge opportunity to, as I say, bring down consumer bills, bring down our carbon emissions, and really build a thriving renewable sector, rebuild a thriving renewable sector in Northern Ireland. But to get there, we do need an Accelerating Renewables Task Force, which is cross-departmental, cross-stakeholder group, to really look at the issues across market, planning, grid, because we need, it's kind of the magic number 3. It's the 3 areas of policy. They need to all come together to get right if we're going to develop new renewables. So we need to bring all key stakeholders around the table regularly to address the issues that are of concern. As I've alluded to, the support scheme needs to be developed, needs to be announced as a matter of urgency. Maybe hand over to Garth and then Paul just to give a brief developer's perspective as to, to get behind that 82%, why Northern Ireland isn't currently attractive.
Yeah, sure. And I suppose, as Stephen has said, support schemes pretty key. I mean, we've seen projects that come to market in the north of Ireland typically, might get low single figures of investors interested in those projects, whereas in the south it could be 10 to 20, and that's very much driven by that support mechanism and the certainty that provides developers and investors. The planning issues that are also key in this whole aspect, and Stephen's mentioned how many of these projects are quite cross-cutting across different departments, are all involved at various different stages, and that Accelerating Renewables Task Force is absolutely key to getting people all pulling in the same direction. And if we can cut down on the different silos and get everybody collaborating more effectively, that will make a massive difference. And we've already seen that with some of the work that has been done by the Department for Economy. But yeah, really is key to get a step change. We've seen just the development of renewables really tail off, both in terms of the investment, but also that's trickled down into the number of planning applications that we see being submitted. So when we did hit, as Stephen said, 400 megawatts in 2017, that was on the back of getting 800 planning applications in 2010, 2011, which fed through to having those projects to build out. Since 2017, the number of applications has averaged in and around 100 per year. So we really need something just act as a catalyst. Planning's a key catalyst across all sectors, but we need the investment environment to encourage that, and that will naturally feed into the planning and the grid piece.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose to put some context to it, my business, we've been involved in renewable development since 2010, formerly developing the single wind turbines under the ROCs regime, which we all know was a tremendous success for renewable generation, for distributed generation, and for the rural community. We have transitioned across into very large-scale solar PV developments and battery storage facilities. Our business operates on an all-island basis, and to be honest, there's a stark contrast in how renewables are developed in the Republic of Ireland to how they're developed in Northern Ireland. And so our focus since 2019 has primarily been in the Republic of Ireland, because everything there facilitates an easier piece in delivering renewable projects. So, for example, we developed a 400-acre solar farm. From identifying the site, doing the project surveys, the reports, the application, and getting it through to a point where it had a grid connection offer from EirGrid. That was 15 months. That's just not possible in Northern Ireland. So at the minute, our business doesn't have any large-scale planning applications in the system. And as a developer, you always have to look at development as a funnel. So you have to put many, many sites into the top of the funnel. They go through all the various stages of assessments, including planning and then grid. And what comes out at the end of the funnel is a lot less than what goes in at the top. But it's the time scale that it takes to get through that funnel. And then, importantly, the certainty and the confidence that investors need to actually go on through and develop these projects and build them out. And typically, an average solar farm that we would be developing would cost somewhere between 70 and 100 million of project costs on the ground. And so the KPMG report was very stark in demonstrating that those funders who do support renewable projects are very reluctant to support projects here in Northern Ireland at the minute, because of a number of issues, as Stephen has outlined. But from the investment piece, it's primarily the fact that there is no support mechanism to safeguard that investment. So I'll leave it as that as a bit of background.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. So if I could just touch on the planning stuff first of all. One of the first items that we as a party brought to this assembly when it was back up and running again was the issue of planning reform here in Northern Ireland. And if we are going to meet our targets set out in the previous mandate, obviously your role is going to be crucial in that. So you've spoken well in terms of how quickly things are turned around in other parts of these islands. Could you maybe speak to some of the examples of applications that you have? I know you currently say you don't have any currently in the system, but maybe Gareth, you do, of terms of applications that you have put into the system, how long they've taken, applications that you may have been required to withdraw, applications that may have gone to our friends at the PAC and still haven't managed to make their way out the other end, just so we can put that in context for the committee. That would be useful.
Yeah, sure. I suppose it's slightly kind of further context that typically, so I primarily work in onshore wind. From basically the day one when we go get in contact with a landowner, it takes us typically, I would say, 10 years from that first meeting with them to when the projects are operating. Now, part of that process is we have to do numerous surveys, and that takes 2 or 3 years. But the planning piece itself, typically we wouldn't expect to see any decision from, whether it be a council or from the Strategic Planning Directorate, within any less than 2+ years. It's that type of time frame. Now, we're not aware, since the reform of planning administration in 2017, we're not aware of a single wind farm that has actually been recommended for approval by the Strategic Planning Directorate. Anything that has been approved has followed a subsequent recommendation from the Planning Appeals Commission. And that includes projects, some may say, oh, well, is that because these projects are controversial? Not necessarily. I mean, we've had projects which have had not a single objection from any third-party representatives that have still gone to the Planning Appeals Commission. All the reasons for that were deemed for refusal have not been sustained, but that additional period, once you take 2.5 years and then possibly another, and I'll speak to previous PAC timescales, would take at least another 18 months. Then beyond that, there's certain planning requirements of the grid piece, which typically doesn't really start in earnest to date until we've got planning permission and have applied for a grid connection offer. So you can see there quite easily that the planning piece in itself can be taken 5 or 6 years as a kind of minimum. And that's very difficult when you consider that somebody is investing in a project for such a long time period before they're going to see any return. And the planning piece, it is absolutely critical. And one thing I would say about it, there was a audit office report in over 2 years ago now that was, as these reports are drafted, it was pretty damning, reading between the lines. That was looked at by the Public Accounts Committee, backed up everything that was said. 2 years on, there was a really good report in January 24 by the NI Chamber of Commerce. All the issues that were raised previously are still issues, and as you've alluded to, the PAC piece is actually deteriorated further. So we're actually further away from where we are. And when we meet with planners, they'll say, oh, well, we're doing a planning improvement programme. We haven't seen anything actionable that has come out of that planning improvement programme that has improved anything in the planning landscape. And I think there's a real risk with the way it's not a school project. It seems to be like the powers that be are going away looking at this as some big grand plan. That doesn't really work in this context because everything's moving around you. You need to look at where you can get a quick win and reduce timescales as quick as possible, target that, move on to the next thing. But we just when we look at the system, we see it's not very agile, and they really need a step change to try and create a wee bit of momentum to improve the timescales as they are. One of the key bits in terms of improving those timescales is resourcing within DAERA, who typically are involved in all renewable energy projects. That is the one time scale that holds up the whole process, and the team that they have to do that work is quite small. It needs resourced, but the funding apparently isn't there to resource it. Now, it's frustrating for us as developers. We have the highest planning fees in the UK and Ireland by some margin. We've got the slowest planning decision timescales, but the money that we pay in our planning fees, typically for a wind farm, always over 100,000, and has been up to kind of near the maximum fee of around £270,000. There's very little value for money in that spend that we're providing. And what's frustrating for us is none of that money is directed to those consultees that need the resource to do the work. So, and we've raised this issue, and also oftentimes when we speak to DFI, they'll say, oh, well, yeah, it's DAERA's holding everything up. Our argument would be, well, use some of the planning fee to resource that team so that you can improve the timescales, because that will have the single biggest impact on reducing those planning timescales.
And then obviously the announcement by the PAC that they're not going to look at anything now until at least 2026, probably 2027 in terms of Dalradia, I suppose further diminishes confidence within the sector in terms of bringing forward applications. Keen just to take your view before moving off the planning stuff, is one of the proposals we put forward is the ability for the Department for Infrastructure to appoint independent experts that could try and clear some of the backlog within the PAC. Just wondering if you as a sector had any thoughts on that proposal.
A couple of things. One of the things, sometimes the Department for Infrastructure is referring stuff to the PAC that it can take a decision on. So those discretionary referrals need to stop. The capacity is not there. The PAC has been clear. There are many issues with the PAC that need to be resolved, but we are where we are right now, and the PAC is not the answer. I think the appointment of independent commissioners, it comes back to this resourcing issue. We're told there isn't the resource. Well, where are our planning fees going? And I think that's something we really struggle to understand, because I think, Paul, you reflected, if you look at your planning fees north and south, to a planning application, you said 10 times, I'm making sure I'm quoting you correctly, 10 times in the north what they are in the south. But in the south you get much better planning timelines. So where is the money going? Why is the system not being resourced? And why is there not enough money for commissioners? Because my understanding Garth, you were maybe developing projects before. It was the PAC, or sorry, the department has done this in the past, but we're being told there's not the finance to do it now.
Yeah, and that's what we're told, but we're just not told how much it will cost, but apparently it costs too much. Just in relation to that grid piece then, so the note that the committee's received from the operator is that there would be no issue in terms of should all these permissions somehow be granted, that there would be no issue in relation to then the offer from the system operator. Would that be your view, or would your view be that there is difficulty in terms of applicants having to wait until they get their planning approval, given the delays, and then going to try and get that connection?
I think it's timelines again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it is timescales, and I think, like, to give you an example, we have projects which have had planning consent for 3 or 4 years.
Yes.
That have a grid connection energisation date of 2030 already. So that gives you some of the timescales. Now it is project dependent, and depends where they are connecting into the grid system and what reinforcements are required. But as I said, typically not much money is spent in earnest until we have put in our grid connection application and it has been accepted. There's been delays in that process, which has kicked things down the road, but it's really key that those where the grid is reinforced is done ahead of time, and some element of risk is taken by SONI and NIE to ensure that they're in front of the developments coming, because without doing that, you're just adding on that whole grid piece on the back end. And we've seen probably more recently that whereas maybe in the past some of the grid infrastructure has got, you know, quite a smooth process through planning, I think that's less likely to happen going forward. So it's even more relevant that they do get in front of us and develop the grid out and take some risk at an earlier stage. And when I say take some risk, I'm not talking about really spending huge amounts of money in terms of going off and building something necessarily, but at least doing the preparatory work where you're doing surveys, identifying sites, going into planning, and having schemes ready to start construction as soon as you need to. And that, you know, that type of development might be in the low hundreds of thousands. In the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot, and it'll make a material difference to those overall timescales for projects.
If I could just add to that, we do supply to SONI, NIE, the utility regulator, our pipeline survey. So we'll survey our members, say, what have you got in pre-planning? We also have a database of every project that's in planning. So when we're talking about risk, we know roughly where the demand is going to come. So again, that early stage work that Garth refers to can be done with a degree of confidence that the developers are coming once they get through planning, or once, in some cases, the planning will be there, but they're waiting for the market support. But we know where the demand's going to come in terms of the network, so it is about investing in it now. And I think to enable SONI and NIE to do that work, I know you have questioned the department on the mandate of the utility regulator. I think that's vital, because we have a very conservative utility regulator with its current mandate that's instinct is to say no, and almost to treat all spend as bad rather than investment. You know, and that said, this is investment in our network that is needed and will provide a return for the consumer. So we need a utility regulator that has the scope to look positively when NIE and SONI do come calling and say we want to make these investments ahead of time. We need a utility regulator that's empowered to say yes.
And final from me, so from my perspective, the beauty of the energy strategy was not just obviously it's good for industry, but it's good ultimately for the consumer and lowering prices. And our job is to try and facilitate that. Would your contention be that if this support scheme isn't introduced as soon as possible and the planning system isn't introduced, there's no way that we're going to meet our required targets that have been set out by this Assembly? And in that, if there's 3 things that we as a committee could do to try and support the sector, or what would those be?
So I think it's the KPMG report stark. We're going to get nowhere near the target if we keep doing what we're doing. So the 3 things are: put pressure on the minister to get this support scheme out the door, you know, which face continual delays. The Accelerating Renewables Task Force to bring all the pieces together, And then I think in terms of your role, I think planning is absolutely crucial, but in terms of your role, I think that utility regulator mandate is going to be a key unlocker when it comes to grid. So yeah, I think see if I'm getting any disagreement from my
always the way
colleagues.
you want. Stephen, thank you for that. Philip?
Thanks. I've just 2 or 3 questions. One just following up on the planning issue. And I suppose I should declare I've been elected rep for over 20 years in North Antrim, plenty of hills and plenty of renewable energy schemes. So I've spoken in councils and whatnot, majority of times in favour of development. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any time I haven't spoken in favour, but it might be there. So I share your frustration because I've been involved in some of the lengthy delays. So you mentioned DAERA. Just maybe if you give us a bit of detail of exactly what it is within DAERA that's holding up.
Yeah, I'll just kick off.
Yeah,
You can
so DAERA are consulted as a statutory consultee. They have a team which will assess an application to look at potential impacts on habitat, flora, fauna, birds, and so on. And probably of the applications that are submitted, particularly for wind and to a lesser extent solar, they are the key statutory consultee, because the bulk of what we produce for a planning application of this scale and environmental statement, it's primarily related to those topics. So they have the biggest piece of work in writing a consultee response. And they're also dealing with aspects such as potential impact on bats and birds, which are European protected species. So there's legislation that they have to be cognizant of in their response. And that team isn't just large enough to deal with the applications that they receive. There's a secondary issue in that to date we've seen, and the strategic planning director are well aware of this, that we've seen sometimes people being over-consulted, so DAERA being over-consulted about applications that they don't really need to, but once they're consulted, they're legally bound to provide a response. But that team's just not big enough. It's quite specialist in the personnel that they need to do that work, and that's why there isn't a huge team, and that is the key bottleneck in the whole process.
And to give you an idea how much delay it's causing, their target for response times is 3 weeks. They're typically responding in 11, 12 months. Now,
Months,
I
did you
remember
say, or weeks?
Months.
11, 12 months, yeah. So 3 week target. Now, we would accept 3 weeks is probably unrealistic, even if it was well resourced. But 12 months is also unacceptable. So
I suppose just to jump in there, that's a first response. So a lot of time for these type of projects, they will either seek further information about a certain thing that hasn't been as clear as they would like, or there might be some other survey or some issue that they request further information for. We produce that. Typically we've got a 3-month window within which to produce that information. Goes back into DAERA. It's not treated in any different way than a first application, so it's back into the queue. You're in the same waiting game. And the same happens to a slightly lesser extent when we do have planning permission. We have to discharge planning conditions. Again, the majority of those planning conditions are related to environmental matters, so they go back to DAERA again. So they're really being consulted a minimum of 2, if not 3+ times in the course of dealing with an application. And of course, if an application, as we've typically seen, is referred to the Planning Appeals Commission, then they're brought along as expert witnesses to argue their case at that stage. So there's quite a big burden on that department.
it's worth saying this is a period of low demand.
Yeah.
When there's not a lot of people investing here, they're struggling. So what happens if we get the support scheme?
If you don't mind just adding to that a bit, to put it in context here, you're dealing with developers who are global experts, but also European leaders in the development of renewable energy projects. And regardless of Brexit, we are still working to the same framework of environmental regulation and legislation. And bringing it back to the direct comparison of how these applications are dealt with in the Republic of Ireland against in Northern Ireland. So an application for a 400-acre solar farm will cost us €12,000 to the planning department in the local council. We're preparing an application at the minute for 300 acres of solar in Northern Ireland. The planning application fee on that is £135,000. In the Republic, that €12,000 fee got us an approval after having a request for further information in 5 months. Once we submit an application in Northern Ireland and pay £135,000, we just do not know when we will get an approval, if we get an approval. So as developers, as investors, where do we put the money? We put the money where we're certain of landing on black. Yeah. So everything is being focused into other territories, and Garth's business operates on a global basis. So he's in competition with others around the world looking to see where that business puts the money. For us, it's more local. Do we go north or do we go south? We know that we will get an approval in the Republic. We don't know that we'll get it in Northern Ireland at all. So the piece is, if we pay $135,000 for a planning application in Northern Ireland, why can't it be resourced properly and efficiently to get us the decision that we're looking for in swift time? And that's just to put it in that context. We're working on the same regulations. And also just to make very clear, we are professional developers. Everything that we do is done to the very highest level. We employ the best consultants. We provide the most detailed reports. There is nothing that is left to question in any planning application that we submit. And that's because we're always under threat of somebody taking a judicial review. We don't want a judicial review. So we ensure that we put all the effort into the applications right up front. In fact, we go beyond what even would be the requirements, I think is fair to say. So we believe that we do everything properly and everything is well considered. And it shouldn't actually take that much for the experts within the consultees to review what we submit, because it has been done properly to start with.
Okay. So I'm conscious that the FI is responsible for planning, not Department for Economy. So just moving on, I mean, incentive schemes obviously very important, vital for developers. Again, you know, and with my own experience of dealing with this, you know, some of these issues are smoothed over if there's incentive schemes for local communities, if they can benefit from you know, whatever development is taking place. You know, is that something Renewable NI would be in favour of, a standardised, even regulated incentive scheme for local communities with regard to developments?
I think it's fair to say it's something we're doing anyway. Yeah. So making a requirement, look, I think sometimes government can get in the way and maybe make things more difficult. But I think if it's in a way of strategically ensuring the best investment in communities, but in terms of requiring developers to make that investment in communities, it's happening anyway. It's something we do. The last figures we have on it is about £2 million a year currently go into community benefit schemes, and that's before you count 15 to 20 million pound in rates as well that developers are paying. So I think the principle is the right one. I think then getting it right, and certainly if you look at the Scottish model where it's more expectations are set, but every individual project will be different. So there isn't a statutory requirement in Scotland, but there are threshold figures that are expected. But that can take account of maybe you get a particular site that has higher grid connection costs or whatever else that, you know, it can vary. But they publish all their community benefit figures through Local Energy Scotland. So there's really good transparency about what communities are getting. And I think that type of approach where government is helping almost put transparency on community investment. But Garth, maybe you can speak to more to what you are doing in Northern Ireland currently.
Yeah. So I suppose typically we've done funds in different ways. We've done them in terms of having direct funding mechanisms with local community associations, which works quite well because then they can maybe match fund and they've got other projects that they can then seek further funding for. Or we've done things where we've put a pot of money and it's administered through a third party and people put in applications for funding. All those elements work well. Another thing we've done, I work for a company called RES, we're the largest independent renewable energy company in the world, and we do a local electricity discount scheme where people within a certain radius would get money off their electricity scheme. I suppose it's important to mention that all these things, and particularly in the context of Northern Ireland, which is quite small, you know, speaking to and having good dialogue with the community is key to finding out what is actually important for those different communities, which will be all different and can be quite different, you know, from one small village to the next. So that's kind of a key aspect of it. But I think over, you know, even the actual money involved, which, you know, the sums can seem quite high, the things that actually really make a difference to communities is the fact that there is money that somebody can put on a bus service to bring old people to a local centre where they can meet with each other, or, you know, things like that are what make a difference. And I think across the industry, basically every project that is operating, certainly on a commercial scale, is doing funding of some type. As Stephen says, making it very, very specific and regulated could cause issues potentially, but I suppose, you know, we're open to discussing what people think would work well.
Just, Chair, one final question. Meeting demand and meeting targets and continuity of energy supply, so wind farms onshore are vitally important to that, but probably won't meet all of those things. So, like, how important is diversification? And even with that, will that ensure all of those things are met, or is battery storage vital to this whole process too?
Storage is. It's almost when we get the support scheme for onshore wind and solar, we'll be coming back to you to say how do we support storage, because it is the next piece of picture. You know, we want to make sure, strange as renewable NI, but I'd say renewables aren't an end in themselves. They're a method of decarbonising our electricity system and bringing down consumer bills. So to really decarbonise, to get those kind of final ways, so we've decarbonised the power sector about 45%. But the more renewables we put on, to be able with confidence to turn down those fossil generators, you need the storage, you need the synchronous condensers, which don't ask me to explain. But you need the system services that allow us to not rely. So Sony, the system operator, has a target to reduce from 3 minimum fossil generators to 2 by 2030. We actually want to accelerate that. We're looking at how can we do that more quickly and take the carbon out of the system, but also take the pressure out of the system. So developers also face constraints where sometimes we're turning off renewables and keeping on fossil generators, which are more polluting, more expensive, and obviously the fuel is coming from foreign sources. So in terms of energy security, we need to see if we can accelerate that timeline for turning off those fossil generators and relying more and using more of the renewables we have.
Thank you, Philip. David?
Thank you, guys. Everybody's covered planning and those issues. I feel you're paying a simple plan application for a pub recently to change the letters, to change the name of it. Took over a year in planning in my own area, and the system just doesn't work. So I understand you bringing something that is slightly challenging to them. Also thinking there's a development head on, you're saying about the 5-year delay, and I was thinking, so every £1 million spent, that's basically never going to be investment until you've got a security, because you put $1 million in 5 years time, that's $1.5 million needed, or else the developer would put the money or investors somewhere else. That's crazy timescales. But I want to look at just a different. The energy piece is something I'm kind of new to into the committee, but it's also vital for our economy, because if the energy cost drops, then our manufacturing base has a cheaper output. So I'm looking at it coming at a slightly different way here, just and thinking of consumer pricing. So you have an 80% target in this stuff, and as a party we absolutely support that 80%. Actually, we would love that to be 100% renewable and beyond on the island, not just limit yourself, and you know, the schemes to support that and get the debt markets in place and all. Totally appreciate that and want to see it happen. But by kind of aiming to hit, if that target was hit, how does that affect the price to the consumer? So what happens to, so, you know, we're talking about targets, we're talking about decarbonisation, and at one level, and we all understand that, but a consumer understands the price that they pay. So what does that do?
Okay, so there's a couple of reports. Actually, the next report we're going to do is to look at 2030 to see what the overall price is, because that really hasn't been done in detail, and that's the next thing Renewable NI plans to commission. But in terms of what was done in the past, we had a report called the Wind Dividend that said to date, and this was 2019, that renewables had net brought consumers' bills down by £4 per year. Now, that's when we were making huge investment in the network, so it was taking account of all those costs, and there was still a reduction in bills. I think the way to think of it is, you often get people here talk about all the investment in grid and how much it's going to cost, and does that not put consumer bills up? Well, grid's about 15% of the consumer bills. What renewables does is bring down the wholesale price, which is about 60% of consumer bills. So in a really simple way, we're bringing down the big bit and putting up the little bit, if that makes sense. But to quantify it a bit better than that, NIE did a report, Networks for Net Zero, when the target was 70%, and they estimated that getting to 70% would reduce consumer bills by about 1%. We had a further report called Achieving Zero, which looked at getting to zero carbon electricity, but it said by getting to 80%, you would save consumers an additional 50 million compared to that 70% figure. Now, the reason why we want to do another report is that's when the gas price, that was pre-Ukraine. So any of those figures are going to be underestimates. But I think the important thing to get across is renewables is the cheapest form of new generation now by far, given where the price of gas is at. So every wind farm, every wind turbine, every solar panel is bringing down the consumer bill.
Yeah. And I say this, I'm going to say it, but I completely want to see this happening, the renewables happening. I'm completely on that page. I think if we can control our energy on this island, then we can control, you control everything basically that happens with it. Totally with you. But whenever, just quickly Googling, whenever you look around 50% roughly of our energy is renewables at the minute. In England, that's less than 30. And it said, you provoked my interest when I was reading through the thing, that our price is cheaper. But whenever you look at the price, we're actually not. We're actually slightly more expensive. So for the consumer, if we have more renewables which are cheaper, and that price that you're paying to the end person generating that energy is less than gas or coal, then how come the consumer's paying slightly more? It is slightly, but it is slightly.
Yeah, no, it is. There's a couple of factors. So carbon pricing in Great Britain is cheaper than in Europe, and because we're part of the single electricity market, we still pay the European price for carbon. Okay. So that puts up our electricity bill in Northern Ireland. I need to do a bit more investigation into this myself, because it's something we are looking at as well. But my understanding as well, because Great Britain has interconnection with Europe, it's getting cheap electricity from France, which is bringing down their overall price. So there are various factors into it, and I'm not pretending to be a markets expert. If either of my colleagues can add to this, they're welcome to do so. But that's the reality. You know, there's my understandings for now, but I think it is something we need to do a bit more work on.
And just finally, then, what are, you know, the energy grid is on the island, so you know we're talking about north and south, and I understand the plan thing, but where are the opportunities now for us if we were able to sort, and Philip's suggested the three kind of things that if we were to target, if that was solved, what are the opportunities for here? On the island as a whole.
In terms of the economy, another KPMG report we did, Powering a Green Economy, suggested getting 80% renewables would have, and I wrote the figure down to make sure I don't misquote KPMG, £3.1 billion of additional GVA from where we are today to if we hit the 2030 target. That's onshore wind alone. We did another report, the Clean Revolution, that said if we got to 1.5 gigawatts of offshore, that would be an extra 2.4 billion GVA. So that's the economic potential. Jobs-wise, you're probably talking in the region of 1,500, 2,000 additional jobs as well, plus additional rates, additional community benefit, and obviously in terms of carbon, if we get the 80% from where we are today, we'd reduce the power sector emissions by about 75% from where we are today, and that's that's building already a 45% reduction.
Finally, just quickly, so that carbon figure you're saying that we pay in the European rate, if that drops down, is that amount that would be charged then less, or is that a standard rate across? I'm trying to work out if you're saying that England is getting cheaper because they're bringing it in from Europe. With it, then if we generate our own and we're creating our own, how can we not get that price to the consumer? I'm thinking consumer rather than I'm thinking the other way around. How you can get that price driven down if the carbon reductions.
May as well hands up. I haven't done a lot on carbon pricing, so I'm not going to say things I don't know. But I know it's an issue not just for our industry but across. So we are working with the NI Chamber to look at this issue across industry to see what the ask should be. But it's clear it's creating a competitive disadvantage for Northern Ireland.
I think, sorry, Chair, that it's generally the wider advantages of substituting fossil fuel generation with renewables is you can't put a price on that, as we all know. But then you've got security of supply. So when we've got our indigenous generation, we're not dependent on importing gas or coal from somewhere else because we don't generate that ourselves. It's important to think of what makes up the price of renewable energy. And again, KPMG have done a report on this, where if you take the RES bid price in the Republic of Ireland over the last few years, let's call it €100 a megawatt. If we were to be more efficient and not double charge consumers, then the price could actually be €45 a megawatt. And that would be where councils wouldn't charge development fees, councils wouldn't charge rates, EirGrid or Sony would charge less for grid connections. And so those socialisation costs, if they were reduced, then the end cost to the consumer would be reduced because the developer simply takes the cost of the project and passes it on in setting the price. So we always have to consider, is it right to charge rates for a renewable energy project that the whole of society is benefiting from lower costs? And so you've that piece, but then you've also got renewables gives you very long-term certainty on pricing. So you can have 25, 35 years of view of pricing, and that takes away the volatility that's involved in the global issues like the Ukraine war. So there's lots of more benefit in terms of the costing and the pricing of renewables if we were to actually focus in on it and see what makes up the price.
I'm totally for focusing on it and doing it. I was just trying to work out how to the consumer what they pay, and the rates bit and all that's really useful because it's once you control that market and you're not it's volatile the world markets and you're in control of your own. That is the absolute ideal. I'm absolutely for all of that. I'm not questioning. All I'm questioning is that sometimes I think consumers or the public see targets and they don't. That doesn't. What they value is the money in their pocket, and so if it adjusts the money in their pocket, then they'll everybody will back behind that and it's that little piece as well and stress that we're for the 80% targets or more, but it's the from the consumer I was looking at it rather than, but I totally agree with everything you've said. So thank you.
And from a consumer's perspective, given the inflation that we've seen in recent years, they will ask, well, how does this reduce my bill? It's obviously very difficult to do that in the current inflationary environment. I suppose, the key thing that we've seen from renewables, I think it was 243 million saved last year and over 500 million saved the year before because of the volume of renewables in Northern Ireland to the consumer. But I suppose from their perspective, they look at the bill and it's slightly higher than last year, and that's where their focus is. They're not looking at, well, if we didn't do that, it would be this.
So those figures, the 243 million, the 500 million, that was the amount of gas that was displaced. So, sometimes you get people have this idea that you're building more renewables, but you're not turning down the fossil fuels. We're not turning them off, but we are using them less. So that was the savings on gas.
Thank you, David. Padraig?
Thank you, Chair. Just checking you can hear me okay, firstly.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, perfect. So look, thank you all very much for your presentation. It's been really, really interesting. and even the responses to the questions I've found really informative. I'm going to touch on one of those in a wee second. Just, I suppose, in preparation for his coming, I was aware, obviously, of the fact that we had an Amber alert earlier this year. And I suppose without sensationalising that or going into that, because it wasn't unexpected, the lack of wind, renewable wind energy did obviously play a role in that. So I'm just wondering, in terms of diversification, how important do you think it is for the diversification of different types of renewable energy to I suppose, make sure that doesn't happen again?
I think it's vital, and if a primarily wind developer on my right and a solar developer on my left, and the good thing is they're complementary. Typically when there's no wind, there's more likely to be sun, and vice versa. So there's complementary there. We touched on battery storage earlier. That's going to be key, and what at the minute we have is short duration storage, essentially fast response storage. But we don't yet really have a market to incentivize long duration storage where we can store potentially up to 100 hours worth of renewable generation at times of high wind and low demand. We can be storing that in batteries or other forms of storage, and putting that onto the grid then when there is low wind and sun, which does of course happen. So there's that need, and as I often put it, it's not wind or solar, it's both. It's not large scale or small scale, it's both. It's not onshore or offshore, it's both. We do need to make sure we diversify. But I think what we need to be clear when we talk about diversity, it's diversity of zero carbon technologies. I think we need to stay on that goal. There is a future without fossil fuels. Our Achieving Zero report gives us a pathway to that. So we can be fully zero carbon on the island, and that should be our objective. But we will need multitude of technologies to get there.
Yes, Jaron, on top of that is also the critical importance of interconnection. We need interconnection north and south on the island, and then east-west across to the other markets. So interconnection is vitally important for security of supply, but also in helping to keep the prices down.
Yeah, I mean, I know Jerry asked earlier if there were 3 things we could do. I don't think, because you can't do it, I didn't say it, but if you could turn on the north-south interconnector tomorrow, that would be a huge benefit to us. But obviously the problems that have besought that project are going to continue until we understand at least 2027.
Yeah, thank you for your responses. And I think what's very clear there is, from what you've said earlier in your presentation and there now as well, is we need better communication. We need better working across the island, and that's irrespective of putting politics to one side. This is going to benefit us going forward in terms of renewables, and it's going to benefit the consumer, and that has to be the key thing in all of this as well. Was really interested in the point on incentives, which was mentioned earlier, and just wanted to build upon that as well. In terms of small scale or micro generation then, and our energy ambitions, how important do you see that? And I suppose, would you recommend incentive schemes to encourage that uptick, particularly in larger community energy projects?
One of the first things I would say is we've argued that the support scheme for utility scale projects should be reduced for entry criteria to 1 megawatt to allow what have become out of the old ROC scheme, like Paul's alluded to, what were relatively small developers have grown into a professional class. So the Great Britain scheme is from 5 megawatts and up, but we argue for Northern Ireland it should be for 1 megawatt and up, and that will give more access to that scheme. But I think even then you're still going to see a gap of the farmer or the community that want to invest in renewables, and I think certainly in speaking to the department, they see that as their next step. I think we call it a CFD, or Renewable Electricity Support Scheme, the scheme that's hopefully imminent. It'll be for the larger scale, but getting megawatts in the system quickly. But another report we did with KPMG, we do work with others, other consultants, that looked into the future of the small scale. It was called Empowering You, and it has shown that whilst if you want the cheapest form of electricity, you do go big. But actually, even that smaller scale 1 to 5 megawatt project, the premium now is quite small compared to what it was under the ROC scheme, where it was you got 4 rocks for those projects compared to 0.9 rocks for a larger project. You know, it's a big differential for the consumer to pay. But that premium that you pay for more community-based projects has reduced. It is more affordable to do that now. So we do think, you know, this is the democratization of energy. We've gone from 3 power providers to 23,000. We need to keep expanding that out, and that will not just, I suppose, give other people the opportunity to benefit directly from renewables, but also give us the wider buy-in for the whole energy transition.
I think it's a really important piece that's raised, Chairman. Distributed generation can make a really valuable contribution to the network, and I think it's important that we recognise what was done through the ROCS scheme. My previous business was Simple Power. That business developed 52 of those single wind turbines, and I think there's a total of about 900 of them have been developed across the province. But there is going to be a very clear gap that the member has recognised, and Stephen has given more detail on. The support scheme that we're expecting to be announced in the next few weeks is going to have a threshold. And that threshold is set, we believe, at quite a high level, and actually then excludes whether it's micro or mid-scale generation. And given the importance of that distributed generation piece, we believe that work has to start very quickly thereafter to develop a scheme that covers the gap up to wherever our new scheme is going to start at. That then brings us back to even another member mentioned earlier about industrial support. So, you know, in the Republic of Ireland, there's permitted development rights for any size of solar rooftop on industrial premises. We don't have that here. We still have to apply for planning approval. But on that, you know, if a factory wanted to develop 2 megawatts of solar on the roof, at the minute there is no financial support scheme to enable the factory to do that. Whereas in making the investment decision, they really need to have that support. And the other element of that is, if you take a factory that, for example, doesn't work on a Saturday or Sunday, that means that the generation without an export connection isn't being utilised. So we need to really step up the export connection piece in partnership with NIE, and they have already done very good work on this, and we need to work closely with them. But the member's absolutely right. We do need a support mechanism below what is expected for the utility scale projects.
Are you, Patrick? Yep. Okay. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Chair. Obviously, we're hearing a lot of frustration. That's what I sense in terms of wanting to get on with things, planning and some other areas as well in terms of the support schemes and things which can be and should be done. And I take David's point in terms of, you know, a lot of this is focused around, in terms of consumers, what it means for them, what it means for their pockets. But I think that that's not the sole issue here. I think that there's a growing amount of people and concern, particularly from younger generations, in terms of the environment and wanting a cleaner and greener environment. So it's not all down to what we can get, financially, personally for ourselves in terms of cost savings. I think that there's a wider thing that we need to do, obviously, to make this place a better place and sustainable in the future. In terms of investment, obviously there's clearly been a lot of capital investment lost because people have obviously decided, and developers have decided to go elsewhere or move on. Is there any, and this is not going to be an exact figure, of course not, but is there any estimates in terms of capital investment that has been lost here as a result of the delays that we've been dealing with?
I wouldn't have an estimate to that, but I'm going to quote KPMG again, of £3.5 billion of investments that they've transacted in 18 months on the island in the renewables market. 3.4 billion of that was in the Republic of Ireland. So we got 100 million out of 3.5 billion industry.
Clearly there's obviously a significant problem, and whilst we are encroaching into the planning issues, I think that we can't isolate ourselves either from it, because obviously it's having an impact in terms of meeting the targets for 2030. one of the proposals that you've articulated is around the task force. The concerns that I have, and I think that anything that we can do, we should do. I've seen task forces set up in the past for various other issues, and people come to the table, but when it comes to either bringing money or making change, sometimes they tend to move away from that. So, how confident are you that if we were able to advocate for a task force, what change could you see that would happen through that, as opposed to the mechanisms we have at the minute?
I think there's a couple of things there. So this idea came from work DFE are already done. I hope I said at the start that there is good work being done. In respect of offshore, there was a realisation to get offshore by 2030. You absolutely needed to accelerate things, and a steering group was put together that includes NIE, Sony, DFE, DFI, DERA, Crown Estate, and ourselves, and we're all round the table. And within, I think it was about 6 months, a draft action plan was published. Now, albeit we're still waiting for the final action plan after it's been imminent for some time, so there have been delays with it. But I hadn't seen government work as well as that and work at that kind of pace before. So I think there's a track record there that shows it can be done. I think the other issue is ownership. At the minute, the 80% target feels like it's DFEs. It needs to be everybody. It's part of the Climate Act. We don't yet have climate action plans to put that emphasis on departments, although obviously they know they're coming. But the planning system needs to own that 80% target as much as DFE. And I think that's also part of the agenda. And the other thing is just, look, I express my frustration as effectively as a lobbyist now. I go meet the department, then I go meet NIE, then I go meet Sony, then I go meet the utility regulator. I meet NIE, they'll tell me it's Sony. I'll meet Sony, they'll tell me it's the utility regulator. I meet them all together, they'll tell me it's DFE. Get them all around the room, people can stop the blame game and go, right, what are the crux of the issues here? Who's doing what? Whose action's up? And that's what we're really looking for. We get those people all around the table, whether it's once a month or whatever it needs to be, and go, what are the issues? And start holding the account. Because, we talked about DERA earlier. Why would DERA be accountable for planning timelines? So why would they resource their planning response team? Because nobody's holding them accountable. So again, if everybody's in the room saying, this is your target, then we get ownership, then we maybe start getting resourcing, and then we maybe start getting solutions.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I suppose, just in terms of the actual timescales, for hitting 2030, you need to start building projects in 2028. So we do need a significant step change in terms of the pace, and that's why that task force is so important, because you bring everybody together, and we've seen it before. Very quickly, people start working better together. They're communicating, decisions are made faster, and people are held to account, and that's the kind of momentum we need to be built, and as soon as possible.
No, absolutely. I think that was a useful description of what it is, and I think that I'm not in politics that long. The 15 years that I've been in, I've been listening to silos and separate working and all of this, and it is frustrating. So I fully support of that. A final question, just in terms of the utility regulator. Obviously, last week we had a discussion in terms of the utility regulator bill, in terms of what it would do, advice, advocacy, all that type of stuff. In terms of changes, we're going to hear no doubt from the utility regulator shortly. But in terms of things that they can do, additional powers possibly that they could have, are there things that you see that would be useful that obviously we could take forward with the utility regulator?
I think it's that overarching duty to facilitate net zero, just like we were talking about the 80% given ownership there, because at the minute their duty is price to the consumer, which to me actually shouldn't be a contradiction to what we're trying to do, because as we've discussed, we invest in renewables, you will bring down the price, but often that mandate is interpreted very much in the short term. And certainly my understanding is that even when the utility regulator, because my understanding, I meet with John French regularly, is he wants to progress on climate action, but when he goes too far outside his mandate, he gets slapped back down again, to use that term. So he doesn't feel empowered to do the things that he can see are in the best interests of the consumer and the wider Northern Ireland economy. But he has to exist within a statutory remit. He, I'm sure, will come here and tell you much better what that means in practice for him, but that's the impression we get. And you know, again, when it comes to NIE's price control, for example, you know, we need a much more facilitative approach to the anticipatory investment that Garth referred to earlier.
Yeah, and I suppose that the utility regulators mandate then essentially nearly hamstrings Sony and NIE, because they look at the type of projects they'd like to bring forward, whether it's likely to be successful, and then how much risk they themselves are taking. So it's really key that that is changed in include net zero.
Thank you, sir. Saoirse.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, yes. Okay, so I know we're short in time and everyone's said most of the similar things that have been said, but just want to touch on quickly the battery storage, making a play for MLK site. Let's make it happen. Engine of the future. But listen, I'm being serious. I mean, we need to be ambitious, we need to be thinking big about it, and there needs to be a lot more energy around it, to pardon the pun, because the public are sitting watching this and they probably don't have a clue. And I'm big enough to say that none of us are energy experts around the table, so do you know, I want to make that really clear. But in terms of bringing in the public understanding in terms of actually meeting the goals, you had mentioned there about just a few minutes ago about 2030, and then saying we'd need to be starting, you know, CapEx 2028. Don't say that outside of this room again, because people will literally do the Northern Irish thing and go, right, okay, that'll do rightly, we'll just start that then. We need to be starting like years ago, and that's the reality of what we're dealing with. So we'll do our part insofar as the committee, but you know, there needs to be much more of a public ownership of meeting this target. As Gary said, people do care about our climate and the environment, but it's a very opaque conversation and it puts a lot of people off. So stuff around planning, you know, log jams, stuff around the likes of changing the VARES potentially of the utility regulator, stuff like that. Yeah, we understand that to a certain degree, right? But in terms of how we're actually getting that conversation into the mainstream as to making it a critical thing, and you touched on something, Stephen, really important. Do you remember that time you did the Children's Services Corporation Act?
I do remember it well.
So I kind of see that almost as a blueprint for cross-departmental working. And everything I've just heard in the last hour and a bit, that's the critical thing. But our system isn't set up like that. Even the statutory committees, the way they are set up to report. So for me, there needs to be, you've mentioned ownership, you know, why would a certain department sit around the table and go, well, actually that doesn't sit outside or inside our remit, so why would we do that? There needs to be a much braver and bolder conversation about how we make that happen. The one thing I really want to pin down details wise is on page 43 of our pack, you mentioned about innovate to address the skills shortage, and you'd also mentioned the potential of 1,500 to 2,000 jobs. Skills is my big thing, people is my big thing. See, at the minute, I'm not convinced that we have enough people to actually resource these projects if and when they happen. What's happening at the minute in the industry is they're literally robbing Peter to pay Paul in terms of skilled engineers, fitters, mechanics. And we just need to be really honest about that and realise that. At the same time, we have some of the highest economic and activity levels in the UK. I think there's a real big potential here. We've got people, you know, out this week in the US selling Northern Ireland, and yet here we are sitting having conversations about how we can't get things going from 10, 15 years ago. So for me, there needs to be much more accountability to us in this building, but there also needs to be a public conversation that happens in terms of empowering people to get involved. So just really quickly on the skills piece, what's your guys' challenge on that to us?
You just want to speak to recruiting and
yeah, I mean, recruitment's very, very difficult at the moment, particularly just obviously with the increase in renewables. Everybody's looking to the same people, and people are moving around, and there's also some particular jobs that are quite specialist. If we take ecology that I've chatted about, there's not lots of people that you hear going off to university to do a degree in zoology. So you know, there is skill shortages there, and I suppose probably the industry needs to do a better job as well of highlighting to people the type of jobs that are involved. And for our company, there's nearly every different type of occupation you can imagine is on our payroll. So we need to do a better job there. We do apprenticeships and things like that, and I think that's probably, given the time scales, I think that's something that we probably need to try and focus more on, as well as just highlighting, you know, what good high value jobs there are in the industry.
So have you approached about a sectoral partnership? Because obviously NIE are doing the sectoral partnership in terms of, you know, basically utilities apprenticeships. So have you had conversations with the department in that regard?
I think one of the things that's come through the offshore working group is the need to get collaboration. That's because there does seem to be pockets of things happening here, there and everywhere, but it doesn't all seem to be pulling together, and that's something we've actually... So Invest NI are doing work, the department's doing work, the industry's doing work, and you mentioned the likes of NIE. We need to kind of pull that all together, and you know, that's the sort of thing that could come out of the task force as a work stream, you know, because it is going to be a challenge. I know as an MLA, it was always good when somebody says, here's what they're doing elsewhere in the south. They have a great scheme called Green Tech SkillNet. And
streets ahead.
Streets ahead. You know, taking people, we haven't talked about the just transition, but we often do talk about the just transition. You know, looking at how we can transition people from whatever existing roles are in, whether it's the fossil fuel industry or unemployed or whatever else. Green Tech SkillNet is publicly funded investment in helping people transition from whatever place they're in, getting them into the green economy. I think that's a really good model. We work very closely with Energy Ireland, our partner, our parent association. They help facilitate Green Tech SkillNet, and I just look enviously at it as something, wow, I wish we were doing that here.
Yeah.
Another element you mentioned there was bringing the community with us, and Stephen can give you some detail on my piece, but we're recognising that communities are now way more accepting of renewable projects than they had been over the last 10 or 15 years. To give you an example, 2 projects, 300 megawatts of solar and 300 megawatts of battery storage. No objections, not one. So the public are recognising that we do need to deliver these renewable energy projects, and they're accepting of it, and they're not objecting. But I suppose one piece that I've always reported back on was I attended a conference in Glasgow in 2010, and Alex Salmond opened the conference, and he stood on the stage and made a speech, and the whole room was on fire with the energy that he delivered from his speech. Alex Salmond was a renewables champion for Scotland, and what he delivered in his tenure there was tremendous. He made it happen. We don't have a renewables champion. I don't believe, and I'm speaking with the greatest respect to you all, I don't believe we have any one renewables champion in Northern Ireland. And it may be that, for example, the Executive Office would consider a junior ministry or something to champion climate change and take responsibility for the Climate Act, and part of that would be a renewables champion. And I think if we had that, we could make great strides in working with the group that Stephen's advocating for.
Yeah, I'm just briefly, I'm really glad to hear you say that, because you can't be what you can't see. And that's what I mean in terms of the visibility and the energy, as you've said, because unless people actually see somebody out champion it, it's going to be very, very difficult. But I mean, in all seriousness, please do consider the MLK site as a flagship project, you know, not just for this, but, you know, it's big enough, it could house plenty of things. But that's the sort of level of bold ambition that we need to be grasping in the north. Otherwise, we're just going to fritter it away as usual, you know.
Yeah, and I suppose just it goes back to Stephen's point about this isn't a DFI or DFE target or
100%.
DERA. It's everybody. It is everybody. So it's absolutely critical we get going.
Thank you, Saoirse. And last but by certainly no means least, Sinead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Stephen, Gareth and Paul. I think you've articulated the opportunities very well, and also the problems and the challenges. And I think, you know, I don't know, maybe my observation from being in the Economy Committee in the last mandate and obviously the break in between and to now, there is a risk adverse kind of attitude that is happening across all of the departments, and it has a real impact. And I think it probably started with RHI, and then you know, laterally in other incentive packages that were in place that may not have had the proper guidelines and ticks around it. So what would your assessment be on what kind of controls and incentives that should be put in place in order to ensure that renewable generation meets, first of all, the expectations, but also delivers for the consumers and delivers for the investors as well, because everybody in this arena has a piece and has a stake in it. So it has to incentivize everybody and not the few, because we have seen, with the anaerobic digestion schemes, not getting environmental permissions. We have seen rocks that were misused in the past. So how can we do this better so that everybody is on board with it?
I think when we look at the support scheme as we expect it to come, it'll follow the model in GB and ROI, which are both, well, they have different names, CFD, Contracts for Difference in Great Britain, and Renewable Electricity Support Scheme in the South. They follow a similar model whereby there's a price guarantee for both the developer and the consumer. And we talk about it as a support scheme, but it's a risk sharing. So once you essentially bid in as a generator at the lowest price you think you can generate your electricity for, and if you're successful, you get that price banked for 15 years. And what we've seen happen in Great Britain and the Republic of Ireland with their schemes, when we got the spike in prices following the invasion of Ukraine, the generator was actually paying the consumer back that additional income that was coming to the generator. They're required to pay that back to the consumer because they said, no, we'll supply your electricity for XP for 15 years. So no matter what happens to the market price, whether it goes up or whether it goes down, the price of electricity from that generator remains the same. So it's a guarantee for both the generator and the consumer. It takes the risk out for both parties and guarantees the price for, certainly the Great Britain model is 15 years. That's the type of thing we would be expecting to see here.
And just back to what Saoirse was saying earlier about the skills base. At the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee yesterday, the Permanent Secretary indicated that one of the biggest risk factors for the sector was actually skills. Gareth spoke on that just a few minutes ago, but what is the industry doing in order to kind of drive skills towards the sector, and are you working with the schools at that level in order to make this a very attractive career pathway for the future?
Yes, I mean, typically we would have done things like school visits and taking people to wind farm sites, showing them, and obviously the curriculum's a lot more forward thinking about climate change and renewables. So I think, the interest that's been mentioned in younger people in the environment and renewables is starting to come through now in the type of courses that people are selecting at university. I think there's just a bit of a skills gap in that middle piece. And Stephen referred to the Green Skill Net, which is really, really useful and a really good model of how we could do things better in Northern Ireland. I think something that we should consider looking at further.
Mm-hmm. And then just back to the planning, the problems in planning have been going on for a very, very long time. And as a result of that, investors and developers have actually moved away from Northern Ireland completely and don't look at any projects here, as you've very well articulated. Is there a point where, and Stephen kind of alluded to it, and that and talked about a champion, but is there, in your thoughts, would it be better that you would have a department for climate change that took on all of these policy areas and tried to break down the barriers? Because we're losing an awful lot of investment, and that I think it was 3.5 billion investment in the Republic of Ireland or in Ireland on Ireland, and 3.4 of it was in the Republic. I mean, it's shocking because the only difference is policy. That is the only difference, because we have the same capacity to develop renewables on this island. So it's the policy environment that is prohibitive and is exposing, the risk factor to investors. So there is a way to overcome that. And should we have, this was talked about in the last mandate as well, should we have a department set up in order to deliver the targets in the Climate Act?
Go ahead, Gar.
I was just going to say, I think possibly that may have been a good call if it had happened a number of years ago. I don't think we have the time now to go and set a dedicated department up and do that. Now, I'd obviously referred to, us needing to get to 2030. Would have said starting in 2028, I meant shovels in the ground.
Yes, clarify.
Yeah. So, we need to have projects that have got planning consent. We're on our way to grid, in the next year or so in order to meet that 2030 target. I think, having a dedicated department like they did in the UK, that's one way to go, but I think it's probably just too late for us at this stage. I think if we can get the task force, it's probably a better way to bring everybody together in one room and get things moving in a quicker manner.
I think there is a point there, though. The Assembly did declare a climate emergency, and that was followed up by the Climate Act. We're not seeing emergency measures put in place. We've seen during COVID how quick decisions could be made. But, if we come back to the support scheme, we've had a call for evidence, we've had a consultation, we're waiting for the high-level design, then there's going to be modelling work, then there'll be further discussion or consultation on the terms of reference. That doesn't feel like we're in an emergency. That doesn't feel like urgency. I know you alluded to the need for checks and balances, and of course, but we need to be going quicker. We need to be treating this like an emergency. During COVID, we had the Prime Minister come out daily and give updates. Now, okay, climate change thankfully moves a bit slower than that, but we do need that kind of high level. It should be the First and Deputy First Minister coming out and quarterly saying, here's the progress we've made in climate change. That's the level of seriousness that should be given. And it's just not, for example, when we look, and it's funny, when we talk about accelerated timelines and planning, the planning targets are 30 weeks for regional significant development. We're saying, well, could you do it in a year? So even when we talk about acceleration, we're still talking about way beyond the targets that are set. But when we do talk at the DFI about the acceleration, prioritisation of renewables, as not just we've called for, but the NI Chamber has called for, representing businesses across the various sectors. When we ask for that acceleration, prioritisation of renewables through planning, it's almost the impression is like, well, if you ask for it, somebody else is going to want it. Well, we're the only one facing a climate emergency. We're the only ones offering the solution to it. And when I say us, I mean renewables and all green infrastructure. We really need to say we're on an emergency footing here. How can we accelerate? How can we, it might be accelerated passage through the Assembly for some of the legislation we need. It might be accelerated planning for the applications. There's probably various elements we need to be pulling together. And that's kind of what we would be hoping to get out of the Accelerating Renewables Task Force, those types of recommendations that hopefully would get support from MLAs across the board.
And just finally, how confident are you that we will reach our energy targets?
We simply won't. I mean, that's just a matter of fact. As we stand currently, the KPMG report that Stephen refers to, on a business as usual course, we won't come anywhere close to meeting the targets. I suppose we should make you aware that we have had some very positive engagement with DFI over the last 6 months, with the new Permanent Secretary, with the new Head of Planning. And we believe that they're making very positive notes towards supporting major projects coming forward. But going back to the funnel idea, there are no planning applications going into the funnel because nobody's prepared to take that risk at the minute. But I should declare that we are preparing one that should be submitted within the next 6 or 8 weeks. And we will use that as a test case to see how the department is prepared to step up and deal with a major application. And if we see that they handle it well and efficiently and we get a positive result, there are others standing behind us that are preparing similar applications that will flow. But we need to see that encouragement and support from the department.
And maybe to expand the question, will we? Not as we're currently going. Can we? We absolutely can. So in terms of the pipeline of projects, there's 2,000 megawatts of onshore wind in the pipeline. There's 700 megawatts of solar in the pipeline. People are sitting ready to invest. They're just waiting for the policy signal to hit go.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sinead. Gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time to come. There'll be a number of issues the committee will want to follow up directly with the department that you've raised. I'm sure you'll follow the proceedings of the committee, but from our perspective, we know that we're keen to do all we can to support your industry. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you for the opportunity, and obviously if there's any further questions that arise, please feel free to get in touch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, colleagues, some stuff to unpack from that. Couple of things that I've noted which we may wish to do, but obviously in your hands. We may wish to contact the department to seek an update in relation to this support scheme when it will be introduced. Obviously, we have been told on a number of occasions that it's imminent, but it may be useful for us to try and tie down some dates on that.
I have a question next week. It's that question.
Very good,
So
perfect.
I'll get an answer on Tuesday at the question time.
So the committee content that, as a committee, we write to the department seeking an update on the position?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
no problem. Any Clerk, anything else that you
So,
raised?
Chairperson, the committee had already agreed to hear from the utility regulator. Perhaps I can advise them that the committee will want to know, obviously, about renewable energy generation, and maybe also something about the regulation of heat networks. This was mentioned yesterday at the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. The committee also, I think it previously indicated that it wanted to get a briefing from Sony on generally on Sony, but if I can also tip them off that the committee will want to hear about renewable electricity generation and the grid issues. Yep. That's agreed. Additionally then, Chair, is the committee content to write to the department on the NIRO scheme, so this was the previous renewable obligation scheme, seeking the risk assessment and audit plan of other aspects of renewable energy commissioned by the then Minister in 2022, as well as information on the progress of the external consultant hired by the department in September 2023 to advise on renewable energy incentive scheme. So it might be part of that letter as well. So these were one of these, if you recall, members, you all got a letter saying here's the decisions the department took when it didn't have a minister, and one of them was to hire a consultant to advise on a renewable energy incentive scheme. So we can ask about that if that is agreed, Chairperson.
Intent? And I know we obviously spent a lot of time discussing planning, which falls under the remit of DFI, but I think the economic impact that were put forward by our witnesses there was stark. £3.5 billion of investment. This place only got 0.1 of that. So I do think that there is a serious role for us as the Economy Committee to play in trying to drive forward that reform of the planning service, which is clearly not fit for purpose, particularly in relation to the economy. Gary?
Just in the back of that, Chair, one of the things we heard, I think, which is alarming, is around the planning fees. Been 10 times higher than that in the Republic of Ireland, and then obviously one of the concerns being the lack of staffing or whatever around dealing with the applications. Obviously planning's a DFA issue, as you've said, but is there anything as a committee we could do to try and get some clarity in terms of where does the planning fees go? Obviously we could submit that as a written question as private members, but is it something as a committee we could tie into or see? I know Renewable NI are going to the Infrastructure Committee sometime after Easter, so no doubt something for them, but is it something we should alert them to? Is it we have a concern as a committee if everybody...
I'm happy to support that, yeah.
We could write it to the Department for Infrastructure, copying the committee, so they will have the heads up on the question.
I don't want to step on toes like we've...
No, well, I was just going to say I've no issue with that. So I think we should, whether it's the department or the committee, to alert them that we had this presentation and there was issues raised that affect them. I also think we should include DAERA.
Yes,
as a group.
Yeah.
about this.
Yeah.
The thing with that fee is the risk you're putting in, because that fee goes to the council and that fee's not returned regardless of how long you're a customer buying a service off a council and you're not, or a planning service, you're not getting, but the end product might be nothing. So even if you get refused over that time space, you lose that 100-odd thousand. That's ludicrous, absolutely, that level of cost.
Just also to advise members that at the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee yesterday, the department indicated that DFI is working on a new low carbon planning statement in order to support renewable energy. So they're working, Department for the Economy is working with DFI on that. So something would appear to be happening, which seemed, an official seemed to say, this might be about fast tracking the planning system for renewable energy where it was using public sector land, they seem to say. So perhaps they can write to DFI, DERA, copying in the relevant committees, indicating that, see what they know. Chairperson.
Content? Yep. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Oh, yes, sorry, of course. So, here?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to advise the committee that wishes may wish to seek sight of the Offshore Renewable Energy Action Plan and an update on the progress of the OREEP Strategic Environmental Assessment. A decision was taken during before September 2023 to publish the final version of this report. Are members content?
Lovely, thanks, Chair.
Okay. Moving on to item 7 then, members. The committee will now receive an oral and written briefing from the department on its ongoing consultation on petroleum licensing. You're all very welcome to the committee here this morning. I just wish to advise members of another number of pages within the report which is relevant to the briefing that we're about to receive. The clerk's covering note at 358, the department's briefing at page 364, the consultation documents at page 367, the Hatch report at 403, and the BGS desktop summary of the seismic risks at page 597. I'm delighted to welcome Jimmy Graham, Lorraine Fleming and Mark Wilson from the Energy Group at the department. And I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. Good morning, and thank you for the chance to come and speak to you about the consultation on onshore petroleum licensing policy. So I'll start by giving a brief introduction to the petroleum licensing system, the policy making process behind the current consultation. So the department has the power to grant licences to explore for and extract petroleum under powers granted by legislation. There are no active licences, with the last one being relinquished in 2020. And whilst there has been exploration over the last 50 years, there's never been sufficient oil or gas found to be commercially viable. The current legislation enables a company to apply for a licence at any time for any onshore area, excluding internal waters. Companies must meet financial and technical capability thresholds, as well as demonstrate sufficient environmental awareness to be granted a licence. So in 2020, officials began a review of the licensing system, and the context has changed with global commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and then the corresponding need to curtail the use of fossil fuels. To help with our evidence base, the department commissioned independent research by Hatch Regeneris on the economic, social and environmental impacts of petroleum exploration and production. The researchers modelled several different scenarios and engaged and spoke to a wide range of stakeholders, including the oil and gas industry, environmental and community groups, and locally elected representatives. And the findings of the research are in your briefing supplied. In particular, it highlights that supporting exploration and production would not result in a significant increase in jobs or wider benefits for the economy. In fact, the research highlights the potential adverse effects of petroleum exploration and production on the environment and local community. So following the analysis of the research and consideration of a range of options, the department is consulting on a preferred policy position of a moratorium and legislative ban on all forms of onshore petroleum exploration and production. And this includes high volume hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking. So the preferred option aligns with the executive's energy strategy, vision on self-sufficiency in affordable renewable energy. The option would ensure there's a focus on the growth of the low carbon and renewable energy sector, and is in line with the Minister's stated economic vision, in particular creating good jobs and reducing carbon emissions. The preferred option also aligns with our commitments in the Climate Change Act. So a public consultation was launched in mid-January and will run until April. The consultation document looks at the global and regional developments on energy and petroleum licensing, the local geology and policy context, the results of the research, and a range of policy options. So as I said, we've published the Hatch Regeneris research, as well as research by the British Geological Survey on the potential risks of induced seismic activity on the fracking of shales here. So we're seeking views on the conclusions of the research, the draft preferred option, and if there's any other options that haven't been explored. Then, following consideration of the consultation responses, the final decision on the policy will be taken by the Executive and will require changes to primary legislation. And it's proposed that there will be a temporary moratorium on applications that will be introduced while the legislative process is ongoing. So thanks for your time this morning. Give us the chance to update you on the policy, and we're happy to take your questions and provide any clarification on the briefing supplied.
Thank you, Sir. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the briefing. Just a very quick question for me. What is the specific timeline on this?
Yep. So as I said, we're going to close the consultation in mid-April. We have to do analysis on that, and we hope to have that done before the summer. Ultimately, then, we would hope to be able to start the legislative process in the autumn of this year.
Okay, thank you.
So autumn this year for introduction. So coming live, you don't anticipate what until mid 2025 at the earliest?
Yeah, we think introduction to the Assembly is probably spring 2025. Yep.
Introduction to the Assembly, spring 2025, with commencement, in your view, then, what, summer, autumn?
So we will the legislative process will start this autumn,
yep.
And then work that through introduction to the Assembly 2025. But during that, we will have a moratorium through that legislative process, so we'll no longer accept applications.
Will that be a legislative change, or will that be a departmental policy position?
That would be an administrative moratorium. There's no power within the current legislation to put in place a moratorium.
Okay, no problem. When do you think that moratorium will be introduced?
Whenever we do the analysis on
yep.
the consultation, with the responses, we would hope to do it as soon as possible after that.
For sure.
Thank you, Chair. I was just basically going to ask the same thing as yourself. So in terms of there's no live applications, right? But there was the previous 2 active applications, isn't that correct? One for Lower Loughney area and Fermanagh or somewhere, isn't that correct? Yeah,
that's correct.
So I was going to say, why couldn't these just be refused now? But could the Minister do that now? Or is that where this is talking about bringing something to exec and getting that and then rolling it into that process of analysing the consultation responses?
Yes, there are 2 applications right now. So in 2019, public consultation, we had about 5,000 responses, and most of those opposed on environmental grounds. So at the time, it was previously stated that there would be no decision made on those applications until the policy direction is decided, and that would need to be taken to the Executive first.
Mm-hmm. So if the Minister wanted to refuse those now, he could take that to the exec separate from rolling it into the process regarding the long-term plans of introducing legislation to the House at the back end of this year, with a view to that then becoming live as an actual bill next year.
I think we will. We need to seek advice on the handling. We are seeking advice on the handling of those applications.
Mm-hmm.
and we would need to bring forward that legal advice to make any decision on doing something separate before the policy decision is decided.
Okay, just in response to whenever you'd said there about there's no, I'm going to get this wrong, you'd said it was an administrative moratorium.
Yep.
And then you'd said the reasons as to why. What was the reasons as to why again? Sorry, I can't remember what you said.
Current legislation, the Petroleum Production Act, doesn't have within it a power
Provisions
to introduce a legislative moratorium, but the department would put in place a policy moratorium on the basis that we are in the process of putting legislation in place.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone, anything else? No, thank you very much for that. I'm sure individual members will take part in the consultation. Look forward to the development of the outcomes of the consultation and the proposed legislation. So I'm sure you'll be back with us whenever you have further legislative proposals. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members content?
Yep.
Okay, I don't think there's any action.
Nope, didn't get that.
Okay, we'll then move to item number 8, members, which is delegated legislation, employment rights. Wish to advise members that the department intends to make a statutory rule, the Employment Rights Increase of Limits Order Northern Ireland 2024. The proposed rule adjusts limits on statutory awards and payments under employment rights legislation each year on the 6th of April and in line with annual changes in the retail price index, which September 2022 and to September 23 was 8.9%. The affected figures are the limits on various statutory awards and payments provided for under employment rights legislation. These awards include the amount of a week's pay for the purposes of statutory redundancy payments and the maximum amount that can be awarded by an industrial tribunal following a finding that a person has been unfairly dismissed. The proposed rule is subject to a laying requirement but not any form of resolution by the Assembly. Do members have any questions on this one? If not, are members content that we note the proposed rule?
Yeah.
Agreed? Thank you. Okay, we then move to correspondence, members, starting at page 655, where a summary index is provided as item 1 in the correspondence. Item 2 is page 7. Sorry, no, it's not. It's 657. Members are asked if they're content to note correspondence from the Welsh Parliament in respect of the Westminster Economic Activity of Public Bodies Overseas Matters Bill.
Yep.
Content?
What does it mean? So, like, just in terms of the bill itself, seems a bit nuts.
Well, my understanding of the bill is that it seeks to introduce a policy where local authorities are unable to remove countries from their list of service providers. Is that a...
For political reasons, there's a House of Commons library paper which I've provided, which is at page, here we go, 659. So this is a bill which is about public procurement. That actually really sits with finance. The finance department looks after procurement matters. But this is a bill which is being passed in Westminster, and you would ordinarily expect a legislative consent motion to come to the Assembly, seeking agreement for the Assembly, for Westminster to legislate on the Assembly's behalf. Sorry, Mr. Wigan.
So just, I mean, because I know a number of local government authorities have passed motions in relation to maybe the BDS movement and stuff like that. Would this prevent them and, for example, ministers here from carrying out like ethical decisions on procurement?
So my understanding of the bill is that it would prohibit in the procurement process a political reason being used as a reason to exclude. That's my reading of it. But thankfully this would fall, public procurement falls under the remit of the Department for Finance rather than the Department for the Economy. So I know obviously individual members will have particular views on the merits or demerits of this bill, but my view is that it's not for us as a committee to take a position on it, given that public procurement is a matter for the Department for Finance. And we wish our colleagues and friends well in that committee as they may or may not deliberate on that proposal.
No, that's grand. I just wanted to get clarity that it was not for us, that it was for DOF.
Okay, so we're content to note on that. Thank you, members. Item 3 at page 726. Members are asked to note a copy of correspondence to the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero regarding eco-design and energy labelling for tumble dryers and government research into the potential for divergence. Are members content to note that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Item 4 is at page 728. Members are asked to note a copy of correspondence to the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero regarding the single electricity market. Are members content to note those correspondence? Thank you. Item 5 then, members, is at page 730. Members are asked to note a copy of the written ministerial statement from the Minister for Finance indicating the final financial plan for 23-24, including further allocations to the department for the economy of £12 million DEL and £9 million capital. Are the members agreed with that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Could I welcome our visitors to the Economy Committee? Which school are you from? Libavati Grammar School. You're very welcome here, and I hope you enjoy your day. Item 6 is at page 735. Members are asked to note an updated partnership agreement between the Department and Southwestern Regional College. The previous version, noted by the committee on the 28th of February 2024, wrongly included an engagement plan between the college and the department. Are members content that we note those correspondence and that update?
Yeah.
Thank you. Item 7 then is at page 809. Members are asked to note a response to the committee's queries in respect of support for Tourism Northern Ireland for business conferences. The clerk has kindly circulated a brochure on the integrated strategy for business events. The department advises that £770,000 of support is provided. The target is to double economic benefit to 100 million by 2030. Are members content to note those correspondence?
Yeah.
Thank you. Item 8 then, members, at page 812. Members are asked to note a response to the committee queries regarding a letter of comfort which the department provided in respect of 326 tourism NI pensions which are part of the funded Nelgos pension scheme. The department advises that the liability varies from between 22 million and perhaps nothing depending on the valuation of the pension scheme at this time. Is the committee content to note that report?
Yeah.
I should maybe declare, Chair.
I think we probably all will have something to declare.
As a former member of local government, I think I have a Nilgos pension.
Same here. Yeah.
Probably the same.
I really don't know. I think I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, you will do. Yeah.
I'm happy to record those.
Very good, got that.
Padraig or Sinead, did either of you serve in local government previously? Yeah, Sinead.
No.
No, so just add Sinead.
I don't.
No problem. Straight to the big job, Padraig. Item 9 then is at page 818. Members are asked to consider further information from the Secondary Schools Students' Union Northern Ireland in respect of a matriculating requirement in ROI universities regarding the requirement for modern languages at GCSE. The committee had previously agreed that I would meet with them to discuss student concerns. Mr. Honeyford was volunteered or was encouraged to undertake to provide some information given his personal experience with the CAO process. Are members content with this approach?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Item 10 then, members, at page 819, members are asked to note the third report from the examiner of statutory rules. The ESR makes no reference to any rules which the committee has considered. Content to note, members?
Content.
Thank you. Item 11 is at page 827. Members are asked to consider correspondence setting out the role of the Competition and Markets Authority and seeking an informal meeting with the Chair. Is the committee content for I, as Chair, to take the meeting with the CMA and to write to the Department seeking an update on the reform of the price marketing order and the connection policy framework?
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you. Item 12 is at page 834, members are asked to consider correspondence from the British Holiday and Homes Park Association Limited indicating the importance of holiday caravans, etc. for the tourism industry and seeking an informal meeting with the chair. The clerk has circulated the association reports for members' information. Is the committee content to note the correspondence and for I to meet with them subject to availability?
Content.
Thank you. Item 13, members, is 835. Members are asked to note correspondence from an individual to the Finance Minister on wealth taxes. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 13 of page 837. Members are asked to note correspondence from an individual to the Economy Minister on renewable energy. Is the committee content to note those correspondence?
Yeah.
Thank you. Does any member have any question or point they want to raise in relation to any of the correspondence we've just considered? No. Forward work plan then, members. I want to firstly thank the clerk for his work on that and say highlighted page 840 there's a draft forward work plan which we will now consider, and I will hand over to you, sir.
So, Chair, thanks for that. Number of changes to consider. What I'm suggesting is next week we have the Minister, and that will probably all being well be done by about 11:45 or so. So what we might then have is a short closed session just to consider plans for future scrutiny. I had thought certain things were going to happen, maybe they're not, maybe they are, and we could just chat about that in an informal session if members are happy to do that. Additionally, the department has indicated that they want to move the disqualification and insolvency briefing from the 10th of April to I think it's the 5th of June, actually, they want to do it. Hopefully that's okay for members. I think they're undertaking a consultation and they want to give a fuller briefing. We also have, if you look at the forward work programme, on the, here we go, 8th of May, the utility regulator and SONI, if that works for members. So utility regulator will talk about all the things we talked about earlier, SONI, grid connection stuff and renewables as well. The Association of British Insurers is yet to confirm for 15th of May, so members wanted that last week to talk about car insurance and such like and the economic impact thereof. So it is suggested that on the 29th of May, members might wish to have a joint concurrent meeting with the Education Committee on careers, information, advice and guidance, etc., on the 14 to 19 strategy. So this may be a little bit tricky how we do this because these rooms aren't quite big enough so joint meetings. You have basically 18 members around the table. We would get both sets of officials from education and from economy, and they would brief at the same time, and members would then all pile in. I think because we're issuing the invitation, if agreed, and there are rules around this which I'll have to look up, but probably our chairperson will be the chair for that affair. We might have
first and deputy first chair, perhaps, to keep everyone happy.
There's something to this. It's been a while since I've done these, but we might, unfortunately, members have to do it on Zoom. So maybe some members would be here, and then some members would have to join on Zoom.
Can you just do the Senate chamber? No.
I was going to say, I've done joint meetings in the Senate chamber before.
Don't know if the Senate is actually going to be available by the time we get the length of that. It's being refurbed, but yeah, I've done those as well. In the past, we'd also used the plenary chamber, but I'm not sure if we're going to be allowed to do that. So, but I'll come back on that.
I just think if we can, given the importance of the issue, I just think it would be good to have it in person and afford members the ability. It's a bit more difficult to question online. But maybe for my benefit and for our visitors, how regular are joint committee meetings, Clark? Is it something that took place in previous mandates?
They certainly have taken place in previous mandates. The last one I did was there were 3 committees. It would have been finance and 2 others, and we were talking about town centre regeneration. So there would have been 3 committees altogether, basically chatting to officials about something which was cross-cutting in nature, how to regenerate town centres. So this is about careers, education, information, advice and guidance in schools. That's education, and in further education, colleges and universities, etc. That's us, that's the economy committee. So that's why it makes sense to get together to scrutinise this important issue. So yeah, something that members do. Yes, there you go.
Thank you very much.
So
indeed.
Additionally then, moving on, it's suggested on the 26th of June, we would have our visit to the Northwest. This is when We would meet with the Northern and Western Regional Assembly and with the Northwest Strategic Growth Partnership. So they might visit some other things. Maybe it'll be in McGee College, I don't know. And we might have an informal lunch with the Londonderry Chamber of Commerce if that all works for members. So hopefully those dates. Why 26th of June? Because the Northern and Western Regional Assembly is basically a local government organisation in the Republic of Ireland. They're having their elections on the 5th of June, so they wanted it to be a bit later. But that would be, if that date works.
Yeah,
for members.
I'm only joking because all we hear is the two Zooms. When I was in council, all I heard about was carried off. And
I'm just going to bring in each of the members for foil to see their content, because I know it was a joint proposal from the three of them. Sinead?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that should be a good programme. And hopefully we get a broad outline just of that cross-border city region, because I think it's really important in the context of the work that we do.
Thank you, Sinead. Padraig?
Yeah, absolutely. I would be really keen to see who we're looking to meet with and maybe an agenda on that, just because I think from a local angle, obviously, Sinead, Gary and I will collectively be able to suggest anybody else who might be good to attend that as well. I'm just thinking when we are there, I mean, definitely McGee is a key part of that. I think also it'd be really useful to meet with Northwest Regional College and to invite them along if time permits. But if we are doing something around the university, I think just tying in that broader piece around skills and around further and higher education is essential too. So if other members are content with that, but I think if we can get an agenda, we can all agree that collectively.
Perfect. And Gary?
Yep, no, Chair, obviously you'd met previously with the Foyle Port and they had indicated their willingness obviously to engage. They also kindly offered transport at the time in terms of if we need to do a site visit, you know, during the proceedings, etc. So I think that's something that we should take up as well.
Somebody originally born and bred in County Derry, can I suggest that we have a tourism aspect to it as well? I think that's important.
Buses to the airport.
Okay, so we'll work on that, Chairperson.
Perfect.
That's quite a programme. Right, okay then. But look, if you're going to go, then you should see
obviously we make it a full day's programme to make it worth both, everyone's time.
Yeah, sorry to go back.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking the 30th or the 8th of May sessions with the utility regulator and Sony, is there a preferred order of play in terms? No, I'm thinking, is it more beneficial to have Sony first because they might generate questions for utility regulator, or the other way around? I just don't want to get the order wrong.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think we need to think about that.
Well, no, it sounds like a plan. Actually, Sony first, and we'll advise the utility regulator accordingly. Okay. Yeah. No, it sounds very sensible. Okay.
September then.
So then September, post summer recess. So we're Easter recess week after next. Then we've got like 13 meetings, which takes us to the summer. I think the last meeting's on the 3rd of July. So then we have summer recess back on the 4th of September. So the plan then would be to have a bigger planning session to really think about what to do with the remaining 3 years of the mandate. And maybe we could go to Sony up in Castlereagh, not that far from here. There's this big room with a big map of Northern Ireland, and they will switch. Well, they probably will switch off Coquera for you and switch it back on again, so you can see what happens when they do that. It's interesting. I was at it about 20 years ago, so maybe it's much cleverer now. But it's just something to see if members are content, and they say they have a really nice conference room which we could use for an informal session. That's okay. I've also put on to that forward work programme the chairperson's informal meetings, which the committee has already agreed to, but it was just to give you an idea of who the chair will be meeting, and you can see that. Additionally, members want to do some economic principles training with the committee at some point. But they don't have a date for that yet. So this will be the basics of productivity and regional imbalance, all those good things, or not necessarily good things, but all those things that you may want to talk about. I'm also hopeful that we'll be able to schedule in some time after the summer effective questioning training. So this is where I think Public Accounts Committee are doing this already. We get somebody, there's a barrister who will come along, and what they'll do is they'll look at the videos of our committee meetings.
Oh, no.
And they'll give you pointers in front of everybody, kind of thing. But it's
Oh, that's lovely. That's really
it's-
decent.
But it is instructive, and honestly is, and they are very good at it.
X Factor,
And,
except of asking questions at committees.
And there's no prize.
Will we make it to the judge's house?
Anyway, and finally, I've at the back of the Forward Work Programme, you can see all of the requests that came from Ray's research. I'll put some dates on those shortly.
Okay, thank you. Members, any questions on that? No, perfect. Okay, I'll then move to item 11, members, if there is any other business that they would like to discuss. None? If not, then can I thank everyone for their attendance here and look forward to seeing you all next week, 10 a.m. in this very room. Thank you.
Committee Room 30, Sound. 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 Committee Room 30, Sound.